WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that hopefully will improve your life. I'm Stuart Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, we're hoping that our other co-host, Lena Marvin, will be checking in shortly. But in the meantime, what's new in the tech world with you?
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay, well, one of the things that, kind of top of the mind in terms of what's going on nationally, we all know about this shutdown, and I was a little, I won't say concerned, but, I looked on site and I noticed that the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, is going to be shutting down as of midday tomorrow. Much of their functionality in terms of filing and notifications, et cetera. And I'm wondering, whether or not from where you sit that is going to have any actual impact on regular folks. They did make a point of mentioning that the disaster information reporting system is going to be up and running, and other universal licensing system information is going to be up and running. But with the exception of a half a dozen or so systems, everything else is going to be shut down as of midday tomorrow. Is that likely to have any real-world impact, Dave?
I should work tonight and get a couple of filings in.
Okay.
T-Mobile really lied a whole lot in their last filing, and I should file against them.
Okay. Do you think they're going to move any of their deadlines? I know often, or I should say probably always, the FCC has a filing deadlines for comments, et cetera. Is that likely to be amended because of the shutdown?
I don't know, but you always can get around them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're doing.
You're supposed to file when you send any direct information, much less meet with any of the commissioners, and that doesn't have a deadline. So you just say, this I gave to Commissioner so and so, and you file whatever you feel like. Because they don't have to pay attention to any of the filings.
Yeah,
usually don't.
How about that? Okay, I think we're joined by Lena. Lena, are you there?
I am indeed.
Well, welcome. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well.
Okay, thank you. This is Lena Marvin calling in, joining us on Community and Technology, the first edition of the new year, 2019. Lena, we were just talking a little bit about the government shutdown and what impact, if any, that might have on technology. The FCC is going to shut down a lot of their stuff midday tomorrow if the government is not refunded, including functionality on their website. Dave seems to think it probably won't have a big impact on everyday folks, although those technology aficionados that want to get filings in pro or con different actions may be prohibited or not able to do so over the next few days.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So,
can any of us think of something the FCC is likely to do in the next 3 months that would make any difference in our lives?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly nothing that's been announced. There are a few things that, I could dream about that I would love to see them do, but I don't see it in the cards, such as, opening up the whole Universal Service Fund to, fund, free internet for folks in low-income communities, that sort of thing. That would be great to see something like that happen, but, I don't see it. Reinstituting some of the controls that would prohibit the big telecoms from throttling and fast laning their favorite providers and customers. I don't see that happening either. Do you anything on your wish list, Dave?
There are lots of things that matter in the long run, but I can't think of anything that's going to matter in the short run.
Okay.
They're not going to do it.
Yeah, with the FCC, I'm not nearly as concerned. I have much more fear about the census and the Department of Agriculture and them getting their numbers together, because I work with scholars at a university, so getting those pertinent numbers and getting them together, that's not really essential, but it does become essential to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. That's right. We do have a census coming up next year. Is that right, Lena? 2020?
Yeah, and it doesn't look like they're funding it very well, regardless of this. Like I'm worried about the government's collection of data, both during and not during the government shutdown, because they're not allocating what's needed to make this happen, and so much is determined from those census numbers, like how health care costs are distributed, who needs what in their population, in their demographics, what's happening where. That's all so vital to government function. I'm just a little nervous about how that's all going to go down.
And your concern, it sounds like, if I'm hearing you, goes well beyond the shutdown. It's their general MO right now. It sounds like it's not very robust.
Yeah, but specifically with so that's census stuff. I'm worried they're not robust enough. There's some other little corners of government where I have concerns about the shutdown impacting when numbers get out.
Mm-hmm. Like what, for instance?
Well, just stuff from the Department of Agriculture, stuff from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, just stuff that it's part of what makes certain bits of the economy. Like, this information helps push various parts of our economy forward, and without those numbers, you can't do the same kind of forecasting. You can't make the same kind of guesses.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, well, I'm hoping that maybe that conference today between Pelosi and 45 might result in some sort of compromise. I'm not really holding my breath on that. You guys have any prognostication as to how long this is going to go on?
No. Well,
no. Okay.
So, there's a way to look at it, and we saw how to do it in the last couple of weeks from AT&T. AT&T wants to have 5G, but they're not really building very much. So what are they doing? They're taking 4G, a particular variety of it, and letting your phone say 5G, even though it isn't. And a lot of people are screaming this is fake 5G and so on. So when we talk about the border wall that he wants, there should be some kind of compromise. For example, running string 4 feet above the ground south of San Diego all the way over to Texas and call it a wall.
That's a good one, Dave. Just do whatever you've been doing and just rename it. Okay. Oh well, you know, politics. You know, I'm really just kind of hoping that this new Congress is going to maybe have some positive impact on things. Not holding my breath.
They mean well.
Yeah, they do mean well.
There are a lot of nice liberals there. Whether they have, without control of the Senate, it's not likely they're going to do anything positive. They may stop some things.
Okay, well, moving along, there was a big story in the Times today that I wanted to get your guys' take on, particularly Lena, kind of out your way, story on smart cities, with a particular focus in this story on Kansas City, which apparently has been the recipient of, in addition to early Google Fiber contract about 4 or 5 years ago, and then some Cisco largesse and others, they are kind of been catapulted into the forefront of what the tech industry and municipal governments are starting to call smart cities now. You have a chance to check that out, Lena, and can you give us any on-the-ground insight as to what's going on out there?
Kansas City's desire to be a smart city is actually a pretty old one. Back in the early 2000s, I remember Kansas City was being touted as having one of the smartest public transportation systems because they'd have signs that said how far away the bus is way earlier than anybody else did.
Mm-hmm.
And just interesting stuff. Like, they've always been pushing for that identity. So I'm kind of glad to hear about it, catching on, that they're a smart city and they're doing this stuff because they want to improve all of this stuff. They want to make traffic better. They want to improve their air quality, improve their schools. But the question of, how much of those systems can you hand off to not being held by the city itself, but by being held by third parties, by random companies, which is a real concern.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I looked at was, the internet access. That one of the things that they're talking about providing is free Wi-Fi in some of the downtown and quote-unquote poor neighborhoods on the city's east side, where they're going to provide free Wi-Fi. But what goes with that is a bunch of surveillance cameras and other
gunshot detection, and the whole internet piece is being provided by Sprint, which of course has is not responsive to the citizens of Kansas City. And I'm not even sure what is in the contract, if they're responsive to the city itself in terms of the nuance of what they're doing. They are collecting all kinds of personal data from users on their internet system, zip codes, addresses, sites that you visit, even phone numbers. And it doesn't appear as though there's any check on what happens with that data or how they use it. It seems like a big privacy concern to me, and something that should be looked at by the city by Kansas City before they sign up for this. But I think the cat's already out of the bag on it. I mean, it just makes me think about Link NYC right there in New York City.
Yeah.
Where it's just, there's free Wi-Fi, but who knows who's looking at what when you use it.
Mm-hmm. And Link NYC, for those who may not know, you look around the city, in the downtown and many of our neighborhoods now as well, you see these kiosks on corners where there used to be payphones. Well, the city, in their eminent wisdom, gave a no-bid contract to a developer to put in these information kiosks that provide free Wi-Fi all around the city on these corners where there used to be payphones. But what they're not telling us is that in every kiosk there are multiple cameras that are constantly surveilling the activity around the kiosk. They are collecting user data. And not just user data, but folks that traffic by, pedestrian traffic, that walk by, collecting data from your electronic devices. And it's really a gigantic citywide surveillance system, masquerading as a Wi-Fi. And, of course, the other piece that I guess I should mention is they're selling advertising, which is one of the commercial drivers that is supposedly to help sustain the effort and return revenue to the city, which was their rationale for giving out this contract in the first place. And, it sounds like what's going on in Kansas City maybe modeling what's happening here in New York City. And
although the kiosks are kind of less personal than Wi-Fi to your house. Like the kiosks are out on the street, and there is this weird separation, even of digital space and digital connection, I think, emotionally. But it's still very relevant and very related.
Yeah, I read the story that said Wi-Fi to the house in Kansas City. Are you familiar with actually how they're doing that, Lena? Is that a reality, or is that smoke and mirrors?
Idea. Because it's going to become easier, though, because Wi-Fi has gotten much better in the laboratories in the last year or two. And that will make a lot of things that people talked about but didn't work very well more practical. Probably including something like this. In other words, you can put Wi-Fi up on the light post, and instead of going to the next 3 houses, it can go a block and a half.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of results that we're getting in the laboratory.
So, Dave, well, yeah, I know you're familiar with the Link system here in New York City. What's your feeling about the level of surveillance and privacy invasion that is happening here in New York City, and just in general, the whole smart city evolution that we see going on? Is this something that we should be concerned about as private citizens?
Well, have you ever heard of a city that wanted to be called a dumb city?
No, but that's PR.
Yeah, and that's what most smart cities are.
Mm-hmm.
There's something or other that they're doing with the internet, or other electronics for that matter, put in. And
I'm going to interrupt. There is a dumb city.
And which one would that be?
Which?
Green Bank, West Virginia. You can't use cell phone, Wi-Fi, or a bunch of other stuff there. It is actually a thing. Just to put it out there, if you are a total technophobe, there is a place for you, and it is Green Bank, West Virginia.
I'm going to have to check that out, and thank you for correcting me.
Okay, so
it'd be a good thing if they did. There's another place that's pretty dumb, which is any of the places where we have 2 million people in cages, which is one of the great shames of our country.
Mm.
I'm pretty sure those are very connected places, though. They're not accessibly
not for the people who live there.
Fair.
Mm-hmm.
The people who live there are not given any connection. They, in fact, have machines to knock out any cell phones that get smuggled in.
Yeah. And, one of the concerns that one of the city officials in Kansas talked about, his concern that, all the data that they're going to be collecting in the so-called poor neighborhoods will work to the detriment of the black and brown people that live there, that in general tend to be more surveilled, at least that's my experience, more surveilled than the mainstream population. And, one of the things that, this is something that I learned from my business partner, both you guys know Doug, one of the things that he used to say and still says is that, you find crime and bad guys where you look for it. So if you're looking in only the poor neighborhood, that's where you're going to find the criminals. If you look in the other neighborhoods, you'll find them there. But if you're not looking there, you're not going to find them. So when you're doing all the surveillance in the poor neighborhoods, you're going to be turning up stuff and collecting stuff and creating databases on folks that are extremely vulnerable already. And that's a big concern that I have.
Well, that sounds like political rhetoric to most people, but the consequences and the reality are that or worse. Stu, you went to a fancy college.
Yes, I did.
While you were there, can you remember many people being arrested for drugs?
I would say never. And I will say this was back in the 60s, and the drugs were rampant. And you had to do something extraordinary to be arrested. I mean, there were never any police on campus until the rebellions in the spring of '68, and even that was politically focused, not focused on drug use.
I went to that same university, and there were lots of drugs around.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I didn't indulge occasionally, but they didn't arrest anybody.
Right.
And in fact, that's the way the whole country is. And how we know the police system is whatever adjective you want to throw on it. Because there are at least as many drugs in the richer communities. Remember, drugs are expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So of course there are going to be more where their people have money.
Right.
As there are in poor communities. But 9 out of 10 of the people who get arrested come from the poor communities. That's social control. That's abuse. That's criminal, and that's the United States.
Yeah. And now we have smart city technology that's going to play into that, and from where I sit, potentially exacerbate that problem, in that there's going to be more surveillance, more data collection in those neighborhoods than in the affluent suburbs. I mean, I haven't heard any conversation about surveillance cameras in in places like Scarsdale, New York, just as an example of one of the fanciest suburbs here in the New York area. And
isn't that where Dick Van Dyke came from?
No, he came from New Rochelle, but
My mistake.
Same county, Westchester County, 25 minutes from Broadway.
And that was what everybody watched around the world. Mm-hmm. The American TV that made it seem that we were utopia.
Yeah.
Yes, that was all you could put on TV.
Yeah.
Like in China and Russia today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where they have such censorship that criticism is not around. It wasn't around on U.S. TV for many years, and look what we wound up with.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And a point of fact, New Rochelle was a very had a very large, and still does, a very large non-white community. And in fact, the school system there, the parents were very active in protesting. The schools were segregated up until the late 50s. And in fact, there was a big court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court, the Taylor case in late 1959, 1960. They called it the Little Rock of the North, right in New Rochelle, right downtown New Rochelle, a school that was all black, and they would not integrate the school system there. So, I mean, again, to your point, Dave, a lot of that stuff was kind of swept under the rug. You certainly didn't hear about that on the Dick Van Dyke Show when they talked about New Rochelle. And even though that particular incident, that school, Lincoln School it was, and the parents actually won that case in 1960-61, but the city, in their wisdom, tore the school down rather than integrate. I'm kind of digressing a little bit, only because I know a lot about the history there. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff was not out in the public domain. Fast forward 50 years, we have the internet, and we now have these devices that practically everyone has. I mean, homeless people have smartphones now. It's amazing the number of folks that
Well, then you can find them. Isn't that great? That when you put up more housing, you can find the people who really need it by calling up AT&T or Verizon?
You can find it, but are you going to do anything about it?
Oh, come on. This is the richest city in the world. We're not building enough housing for everybody?
Ha, ha, ha.
Which is a tragedy, because there were no homeless in New York around 1962.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that very definitively, except for the people who were so drunk all the time that they couldn't make it to the apartments the city rented for them.
Mm.
But my mother worked for the department, and the way you made up the budget is she said, this is how much it cost for rent, and then there were allowances for food and other things.
Mm-hmm.
But New York City, 50 years ago, had a home, not a fancy one. It could have been a terrible SRO, but it was a place for everybody. And this is the kind of thing that makes you disillusioned. But I'm getting too old.
Yeah. Well, I have a bit of that same cynicism, Dave. I was around in those days, and I've seen a lot of the evolution. And now when I hear all this talk about how technology is going to solve problems, I'm skeptical. One of the things that they're doing in the Kansas City smart city model is they're going to install air quality sensors and water meters to detect links and other things to monitor what's going on. But the question comes back to, okay, you're monitoring, but what are you going to do about it?
Well, one argument is if you don't monitor, you don't know.
Okay. Go ahead, Lena.
It doesn't mean they're going to fix it, but they will have a harder time denying it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that'll mean somebody can push on the mechanisms of change. But, yeah, it is hard to say because maybe they'll just check the rich areas, see how their water is doing, and not care about the areas where people can't push on those mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ask the folks in Detroit.
And Flint, let us not forget Flint.
Yeah. So, but you raise an excellent point, Lena, and thank you for pushing back on my cynicism. and that is without the information, we won't even know what the heck is going on. So let's not get mad at the data collection process. Let's encourage the data collection process, and let's encourage the sharing of that data and the promulgation of that data, so that more folks know what's going on all around us.
I mean, that really is part of the big concern. If a bunch of individual companies have all of this data and they're collecting it from the city, really, the city should have the data. The city should be able to share it as they need, as they want, as is good for the populace. The notion of data rights
Lena?
or not is important.
Lena, do you trust the typical city government more to protect your data more than you trust, say, Google?
About the same.
Google is just much more competent.
No, they're not. If you really get into how does this government protect what data and what do they do, the notion that the city is not protecting your data, sometimes it's by just having bad systems that people can't break into because they don't know how to get through the layers. Sometimes that means the city itself can't keep its own stuff together. But who do I trust with data? It's hard to say. Who do I trust to share the data when I want them to share it? Then I'm going to go ahead and say I trust city governments more than I trust Google. Who's going to profit more off of the data, the city government or Google?
Yeah.
Google's going to profit more off of the data at the detriment of the people.
I think I have to agree with that one, Lena. I mean, Dave's saying that the tech companies have more sophisticated tech people, okay, but that's not going to make steer the enterprise.
Do I want them to protect the data? The question is, how do I want the data used, and who do I want it available to?
Absolutely.
Like I'm incensed that the NSA is collecting so much information, and they're not keeping any of it historically, and I don't trust them to do anything for history. That is a very weird take on the NSA. I'm aware that it's a weird take on the NSA, because most people don't look at the NSA and go, I see the future of the census information in this. That 200 years down the line, people will be able to look at the data that's been collected and figure out what this means for the progress of humanity. But that's a different take and very philosophical, so I apologize.
No problem. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more about privacy and something that I just discovered, a new term, open source intelligence. So stay tuned. Community and Technology with Stu, Lena, and Dave.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
Okay, we're back. Community and Technology with Lena, Dave, and Stu. We were talking a little bit about privacy and smart cities and NSA and privacy. And one of the things that I just wanted to touch on before we segue to a related topic is the whole thing about smart homes. We're talking about smart cities. But now I'm seeing a bunch of stuff in the news, maybe because of the upcoming Consumer Electronics Show, which is happening later on this month. But just a lot of, I guess, noise in the air about smart homes and what that's about. I know, Lena, you've talked about some stuff that your parents are doing using, I think, Alexa device in their home to start to control some of the things going on. What's been your experience with the whole smart home phenomena?
Well, smart homes are interesting. The idea you can have outlets and you can have light bulbs that turn on and off that can increase accessibility. There's a lot of benefits to it, although it does expose you to a lot of privacy concerns with regards to your data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just kind of looking at some of the stuff. I've got none of these devices in my home, and I'm kind of wondering, do I really need that? But, some of the things I have is smart light bulbs. Light bulbs that are Bluetooth connected and can connect to your digital assistant, whether it be the Google Assistant or the Amazon Alexa or some other assistant. And you can give voice commands, turn on, turn off. I guess you can also do timing functions with various appliances, lighting, other appliances. One of the stores I read that talked about turning on your coffee machine in the morning, which seems a bit of a stretch.
How so?
Well, at least the way I make coffee, you gotta get the coffee out of the container. I don't know if you want it sitting out overnight and kind of getting stale, if you will. There's something to be said about it being fresh and freshly made. You have to kind of pre-prep it the night before. At least I'm thinking. And maybe I'm just not hip on. Maybe there's some robotics that will kick in where the whole process can be done
easily.
The question of how do you want to engage with the habits of your life and the technology around you?
Okay.
Because if you ritualize how you make coffee, then you won't want to set it up the night before. If how you drink coffee is you don't care about your coffee on the first cup because you just need the hit of caffeine, then prepping it the night before is a different aesthetic experience.
Got you.
So the question of what do you want to power and why? My mother's smart lights are nice because if she's out, she can set them up on a timer that pretends she's home.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like she's home. You can do that with a regular timer. I recently got a timer to put my entire internet on. My internet shuts off from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Your internet shuts
Good
off?
Good for you.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm doing it with a tree timer. You can pick them up for $6, and you can just turn off what hours you want it to turn on and off.
And you're doing that just to protect you from attack?
No, it's because I use too much internet.
Oh.
I need to sleep.
Okay.
And there's an awful lot of wasted electricity in the internet system.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it has to do with the idea that if I don't go to sleep between 2 and 6, something is going wrong. Now, that internet turning off, does that mean my mom can't turn on or off her light bulbs? Yeah. So you need to figure out, how are you setting up your network structure? Do you want all of it to turn off? Do you want it to turn off to devices? And it gets fiddly. The more devices you have connected, the easier it is for bits of it to break. You lose elegance. You lose simplicity. You lose the aesthetic engagement with your habits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll be fearful of connecting things like my doorbell and my lock. Where you can have remotely control your lock. I mean, to me, that's another point of extreme vulnerability. If you put that online, and my God, I mean, somebody, I guess you could say the same thing about, they can crack your lock with a key. But to me, you're kind of exposing yourself and your systems once you put them online. And the security of your home, the front door, to me, that'll be a little.
It depends on how you view the security of your home. Like,
mm-hmm.
what is your thought of who's going to be looking at your home and how? My mom's favorite example is always people who have incredibly complicated, sturdy locks on doors that are made of glass.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't always think when you look at security, how does this play out? And that's the big thing with the Internet of Things. How does this play out, worst case scenario? If my garage door is smart and I can give people a code, best case scenario, if I start Airbnb-ing a room, I can automate the whole thing. Strangers can come in, pay me for their time in my home, and then they'll leave, and that's great. Worst case scenario, my garage door is just open, and people come and pilfer all of the objects inside. This is not good. Which thing of it do you want to balance? Like, what's more important? Who's making the technology? Who controls the technology? There's so many questions in this developing ecosystem. And it's easy to say, well, I'm just too afraid of the bad case, of if this is controlled online that it'll become unlocked for nefarious means. Well, can you trust a regular lock?
Mm-hmm.
It's an important question. Like, is the worst case scenario also something that could happen by someone just kicking in a door?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you're going to lose me right now, but these are all good questions, and I wish we had some answers. I have to be downtown, so
Okay.
so long.
Thank you, Dave. Okay.
You're wonderful, Dave. Bye. I'm still here.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point, Lena, and I think it forces one to think about all of those systems. As you say, how do you interface with all those systems in your home, in your space? And given that we now have these technological options, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And, I guess I'm kind of knee-jerking in some regards, just kind of resisting the change, having, done things for so long in one way. And now we have a new way to do so, some things that seem so simple, turning on a light, opening a door. I mean, why do I need technology for that? But
so figuring out why you need technology to do that, and if you do, I think that's kind of the most interesting and fun part, because my uncle is having memory issues.
What kind?
And memory.
Oh, memory. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's really rough. It's really rough on the whole family. But he got to know Alexa before his memory started deteriorating a lot, and he can ask her to set reminders.
Okay.
And he remembers to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually incredibly helpful, and it is an assistive technology.
Mm-hmm.
My mom really loves being able to ask her smart speaker device to call her phone, because she doesn't always know where she left it.
Okay.
And that's kind of a memory issue.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to empower people who otherwise wouldn't be able to use something is great.
Yeah, I mean, your example about your uncle, that's fascinating.
We also can use a digital recorder and a notebook.
Mm-hmm.
But a notebook can't kind of proactively start speaking to you.
Right. And I guess I'm really impressed. He's probably an older guy, given that he's having these health issues, that he's able to embrace the technology like that and use it proactively.
Well, part of why that happened is because he didn't start using it just as a memory aid. He used it because he has a lot of things connected to the kind of Amazon ecosystem, where it's stuff about what ebook he wants to read or audiobook he wants to listen to. So it started as convenience for engaging with media. Okay. And the idea that you might have trouble navigating a smartphone, and it's actually easier to just shout at some digital assistant.
Interesting.
So you say, hey, digital assistant, play my book, and it starts off from where you were last at.
Interesting.
And it's also not something that feels like assistive technology, because that's the other thing that's really tricky, is nobody likes to feel like they're old.
Yeah, you don't really want the walker, you don't want the cane, even though you may need it.
My mother figured out a way to engage with her walker, which I think is beautiful. She uses it to move furniture, because she loves moving furniture, and she can move, like, refrigerators on it. And it means that it is a tool. It is a tool that helps her in a number of ways, and it is not one that she feels ashamed about. Because being able to move a refrigerator as an old lady with a walker is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I'm impressed with that. That's pretty impressive there, Lena. Wow. So you have just identified some really powerful examples of smart home technology that bring real value to folks in a real way, not in a gimmicky way, not in a, I got the latest whiz bang way, but in a real fundamental quality of life way.
Well, part of the problem is if you're enhancing people's lives with the technology, and they're a group that is at some sort of disadvantage, you also have an inappropriate amount of control. If the worst case scenarios start to get a lot worse, if the technology doesn't work when you really need it. So figuring out those backup plans kind of feeds back into conversations we've had about emergency planning. If your lights turn off without the internet, what are you going to do in a storm?
Right. And what happens when you lose power? What happens to your uncle and And and
anybody else, yeah.
And anybody else, right. I mean...
Especially if what you want to do is call emergency services and you can't because everything's gone down. Like, you need to start thinking about backup energy and how you keep connecting to networks, and it's part of what makes stuff like WHCR and WEBT so great.
Absolutely. WEBT, our emergency broadcast team. Emergency power at the home. Not just batteries for your flashlight, but backup power systems, battery power. They're now available. Really high
batteries.
Yeah, high quality batteries that can run a phone, can run a TV, that can run 3 or 4 appliances, not your whole house, but they can run several key appliances. Keep your phone charged, keep your phone going. Keep your radio on and or your TV if need be. And these devices are not crazy expensive. And even if you're an apartment dweller as opposed to a homeowner or home renter, these are devices that make a lot of sense to have to back up your systems. As we've been talking, more and more of our lives are run by, assisted by, dependent upon the internet and power, and it's so important for us to have backup systems so that we're not lost when the inevitable power blackout occurs, whether it be storm or man-induced catastrophe or whatever. It happens.
I do think examining your habits and thinking about their relationship to technology, especially at this, this kind of warm New Year's time, is really powerful to realize, do I need the Facebook app on my phone, or should I delete it and get all of those hours back?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's probably a good time to review your internet, your social media habits, if you will. Your apps, your habits, how are you interfacing with technology, and how might I want to improve and or change that as we enter a new year? Have you? Sounds like you've done that somewhat for yourself, Lena.
Yeah, I don't have a Facebook app on my phone, and that's good. Mm-hmm. It's better for me emotionally not to have such. But I do have the chat thing because I have enough people who will try to contact me that way that it's actually kind of important to be able to be responsive over that channel. But figuring out what channels do I really need to be on? Where should I hang out? What should I let go of? And what are my habits with my technology? Yeah. I have this really great app called Dailyo, which tracks daily mood and a few activities.
Okay.
And it can show me graphs and let me know, am I having kind of a hard month and didn't realize it?
So what, you look back at the chart and you get some insight into what's been going on with your life?
Yeah, it's actually better than just I have to proactively do it. At the end of the week, it'll say, hey, look at your stats. Look at your mood, how it's been. And you can see how it looks because it lets you pick kind of trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's color-coded. So, like, green is happy and purple is a little less happy, and you can just choose it and customize it, make it real simple. And, like, once a day it'll just ask me, how you doing? And I'll be like, big smile or little smile or no smile. And then it'll highlight in a month view circles around each day of different colors. And it's neat.
Interesting.
And it just weekly, it'll be like, oh, do you want to see your weekly reports? And I'll be like, yeah, sure. How have I been doing?
It asks you how you're feeling, what your mood is. It's not measuring some bodily temperature or skin reaction.
No, it just gives me like 3 smiley faces, like frowny, smiley, or like really smiley.
Interesting.
But it breaks it down into a graph. So it's like if you're all like 4.3 for the week is your average, you're doing great. 3 point something, oh, that's rough. A 2 point week is a real rough time. it's just neat. It's a neat way to figure out your own baselines and try and figure out, maybe I have been drinking too much coffee.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We talked about, I'm digressing a little bit, but not still on point, smart watches. I gave my son, who's a millennial, just a little older than you, Lena. He was on with us last week, a smartwatch over the holidays for Christmas. And he says it's changing his behavior. He's, typically he's constantly has the phone in his hand, in his face. And now with the smartwatch, he's not picking up the phone like he used to. He's not looking at the phone all the time like he used to. Now, granted, he's glancing at his watch, but it's not with the same intensity and regularity as with the phone. So it's kind of like changing his behavior a little bit.
So I also got a smartwatch, although I got a somewhat dumb smartwatch. It's black and white. It doesn't have a touch screen. It doesn't have a microphone. But I've turned my phone to silent, and now my wrist will just vibrate if somebody's calling or if I get a text. Mm-hmm. It's much less distracting.
Yes. The phone can be so intrusive. I kind of like jump up every time the darn thing rings. And I've finally figured out, let me just get a calming, soothing ringtone. And then it won't be so intrusive when it goes off, and that helps. But I kind of like your example there. Move it over to your watch and just have it vibrate.
Well, I also have had much better tea since I got a smartwatch because I keep wanting to set tea timers all the time so I won't oversteep things.
Okay.
And being able to just hit 2 buttons on my wrist and then it'll wiggle when I need to take the tea bag out, like that is a stupid solution to a silly problem that has really made my life better.
Okay, technology at work, huh?
Yeah, do I really need a surveillance device on my arm to get better tea? Yeah, maybe.
Maybe you do. I mean, it's the simple things in life I find as I get older that are the most important. It's not the really complex problems, it's the simple stuff that really puts a smile on our face at the end of the day. Well, we're winding down. I wanted to talk just briefly. I saw this story about open source intelligence, Lena, that I had, just a whole notion that is new to me. Basically, it's about regular folks who are out there collecting data. And the particular example that generated this story was the sneaky trip that the president made to Iraq on, I think it was Christmas Day. And apparently, regular amateur plane spotters tracked Air Force One and knew all about the trip. They tracked it as it took off from the tarmac in D.C. or I guess Washington in Maryland. And a photographer in the United Kingdom took photographs of the plane. And apparently, the civilians knew about this trip hours before it was announced by the government. And this whole story just talks about something called open source intelligence, that where regular folks are taking advantage of plane and ship tracking websites, commercial satellite imagery, and internet forums for aviation photographers and other social media folks to track all kinds of things that are going on, particularly military maneuvers, and provide intelligence out there to the public that, ordinarily would be covert. I just thought that was kind of an interesting phenomenon. I don't know whether or not it piques your interest at all.
Oh, it's fascinating. The notion of crowdsourced information, the power of networked sharing, it's really, and just how much information is available if you know how to read it. Yeah. That's the world we live in. Okay, well, I'd like to talk about this some more, but we're about out of time. So thank you, Lena, for sharing. Thank you to our audience for tuning in to our broadcast number 1 for 2019. Stay tuned for news at the top of the hour with Brother Bill. This has been Community and Technology with Stu, Lena, and Dave. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great one. Bye.
WHCR 90.3 FM,